Good morning, everyone. This is the 15th session of Hilchot Shabbat, following the shulchan-aruch. We're on Siman, chapter 271, where the shulchan-aruch discusses Kiddush alayim, the Kiddush of Erev Shabbat, of a Friday night. There are different minhagim regarding the Kiddush. I would like to talk about the halacha of not tasting anything before the Kiddush. This is Sa'if Dalet in shulchan-aruch. He writes, Asur lit'om klum kodem sheikadesh afilu mayim. One is not allowed to taste anything or to eat anything before doing the Kiddush, even water. And that's sometimes a problem for people who stay home. They wait for the rest of the family to come from the synagogue. Sometimes there are guests, they come late, and people are sitting there with parched mouth. They need to drink something. And I've been in a situation, I saw kids or some family members who ask for a drink, and the parents get very upset, or you can drink. And this is not the spirit of Shabbat. We could rely here on Rambam, who says very clearly, "Velishtot hamayim mutar." Rambam in Hilchot Shabbat, chapter 29, halacha 5, says "Velishtot hamayim mutar," and it makes sense that the Kiddush would be Kiddush bimkom seudah. It's Kiddush for the meal. Water was not considered for them or for us part of the meal. It's just to quench our thirst. So there's no problem of drinking before Shabbat, before the Kiddush. In the same halacha, we read, "Va'afilu im itchil mibe'od yom tzarich lafsik." Even if one started the seudah before Shabbat, he has to stop and say the Kiddush. And here we see that they had a minhag that we don't follow today, since today we are much more observant. Everybody goes to shul Friday night, but back then people would stay home and we started the meal in the late afternoon, and it would spill into Shabbat. So the only thing that they were required to do, tzarich lafsik, one would stop, pores mapa kadesh, just cover the bread and say Kiddush. And says Rabbi Yosef Karo, אם היו שותים יין תחילה, אינו אומר על הקידוש בלבד ולא ברכת היין. ואחר כך מברך ברכת המוציא. He says, if you already had wine in that meal, you don't even have to say Borei Pri HaGefen, just to say the bracha of Kiddush, which is Mekadesh HaShabbat. Of course, we don't do this today, but when we get to Chod Purim, we will see that it is sometimes necessary, because this is the best solution for Purim that falls on a Friday. Instead of trying to do Seudah early in the morning, finish, and then get ready for Shabbat, the best way to do the Seudah is to start a little before Shabbat as Seudat Purim. Then when Shabbat starts, you do the Kiddush, you finish the meal, and then you could pray Arvit. Or, reversely, you could stop, cover the food, say Arvit, and then go back to the Kiddush. We'll get there when we get to the laws of Purim. In Sa'if Tet, shulchan-aruch says, צריך שתהיה מפה על שולחן תחת הפת, ומפה אחרת פרוסה על גביו. The bread should be covered with a challah cover, a pita cover, whatever is that you use for hamotzi. And by the way, I'm just mentioning that any bread is good for hamotzi. Whatever bread you like to eat. We always used to do it with pita when I was a kid. Sometimes it was the big one, the small one, baguette, whatever you want, you could use for Shabbat, as long as something that is for you respectful and honors the Shabbat. There's no need for it to be necessarily challah. Most Jews in non-Ashkenazi countries did not eat challah for Shabbat. The cover of the bread, there are two reasons that are mentioned. One is out of respect, because usually we say the bracha for the bread first, but here we say first for the wine, so out of respect for the bread we cover it. Another explanation is that since the bread resembles the manna that would come from heaven to Bnei Israel in the desert, and there it says that first a layer of dew would come down, and then the manna, and then the manna, and then another layer of dew, and as the Midrash says, Kimunah Bekufsa, it was sort of wrapped in or enveloped in a box, we do the same thing with the bread. In Siman Resh Ayin Bet, the shulchan-aruch speaks about the kinds of wine that one can say Kiddush over. Today, we are blessed. We have such a wide variety of wines, of kosher wines, whether mevushal or non-mevushal. They have different types of grape juice, less sugar, more sugar. No one has a problem, I believe, with getting wine for Shabbat. So most of the halachot that the shulchan-aruch speaks about are not so relevant today. We have to remember that at the time, the techniques of producing wine and preserving it were not so sophisticated. Wine would go bad in many cases, and that's why he says in mekadeshin al yain sherehora, the wine that doesn't smell good. It could happen to us at home also if we opened a bottle of wine and it was left open or not used for a while. It could go a little bad. So the yardstick for wine, whether it's wine or not, is how you feel about it, if it's wine or not. There was a huge debate in Israel in the I think in the 70s, mid 70s, when Haim Ovadia Yosef ruled that all the wines that have hechsher by Ashkenazi organizations are not kosher, and that is because in the Talmud there's a discussion about which wine is kosher is good for Kiddush, and they said a wine that is not mixed 1 to 3 is the dare al had telatamaya. That's the wording. The dare al had telatamaya. A wine that doesn't sit on 3 parts per 1 part. Wine is not called wine. And the commentators explained that their wine was very, very strong, and you had to mix it with water to make it drinkable. And this ratio of 1 to 3, there are 2 ways to understand it. One is 1 out of 3, and that's how most Sephardic poskim ruled, meaning that you have to have at least 33% wine, and the rest could be water. And the Ashkenazim understood 1 part wine and 3 parts water, so 25% wine. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef argued that the Ashkenazi hechsher in Israel allows 75% of water, and therefore the wine is not wine, and the bracha for it should be shakol. There were very serious debates over that. As I mentioned before, the yardstick for that would be, what is this thing called? Even federal regulations or state regulations could work for that. If is it considered wine, as it is sold as wine, then it's wine, and you could say borei priya gefen for it. If it's grape juice that is so diluted that it only has a flavor of grape juice, but not enough grape juice in it, then don't say a gefen for it. But today most bottles are marked, so it's not a big issue. The interesting halacha is if bet yain migito mekachina alav, you could say borei priya gefen and kiddush over fresh wine, meaning even grape juice, you don't have to wait for it to ferment. So adam eshkol anavim v'omer alav kiddush. One can squeeze a cluster of grapes and say the kiddush on it. And we will talk more about it when we get to the laws of making juice on Shabbat. The commentators struggled with this statement, which is quoted from the Tosefta, because it sounds as if one is allowed to squeeze grapes on Shabbat. And they were trying to say that the hidush, the new insight that this statement provides, is that even though this is a fresh grape juice which had not been fermented yet and has no status of wine, you could still say kiddush on it. But why would the rabbis phrase it in such an ambiguous way that makes it sound as if you're allowed to do it on Erev Shabbat and on Shabbat itself? And indeed, there are some commentators, including in one place Haim Ovadia Yosef alludes to it, that say that squeezing grapes with your hands, not in a commercial way, would be allowed. But we'll get to it when we talk about Hilchot Sehita, the laws of making juice on Shabbat. One more thing, because of the concept that I mentioned before of the dari al had telat maya, that this wine is so strong that you need to mix it with the 3 or 2 portions of water. That was relevant in the time of the Gemara because they made their wine differently. Later on, up until the medieval times, that halakha was somewhat eroded or forgotten because people produced wine in a different way. But then the Kabbalists through the Zohar revived that minhag by saying that the idea of mezigat yain, of mixing wine with water, has to do with the sefirot, with the divine attributes that are represented by wine and water. And they said wine is rigorous judgment. Wine, as I said, is rigorous justice, dinim, and water is mercy, is hesed. And by adding 3 drops of water to the wine, we are doing an action called mituka dinim, sweetening the harsh judgment. My grandfather, who was a Mekubal, son of a Mekubal, rabbi-ovadia alav shalom, used to say that for people who are not deeply immersed in Kabbalah in a way that they not only know the names and the concepts, but are really transformed by Kabbalah, for them to follow halachot that are based on Kabbalah is really not necessary. And therefore, if one wants to do that, it's fine. We should know that it is not necessary because our wine is good as is. We don't have to mix it with water. If we want to do it, and we want to keep some of the symbolism that the Kabbalah teaches us, we can think that we always need balance in life. It's a good idea to have on Erev Shabbat at the table, just before you drink the wine, you want to dilute it with 3 drops of water, not because we really understand what is the concept of the sefirot or the divine attributes, but just for tradition and as I said, to symbolize the idea that we want to balance our life between and bring different powers, different strengths that we have into focus and balance, and be calm and happy and joyous as we do the Kiddush. And with that, one more thing that I'll talk more about tomorrow, and that is, don't force people to drink if they don't need to drink, especially children. Recently I got an email from someone after I wrote this halakha, and he said, finally, there's peace around my table on Shabbat. Turns out that he used to fight with his kids to force them to drink the wine or grape juice Erev Shabbat, and it would make the whole experience an unhappy one. Only the one who says the Kiddush needs to drink. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. Have a great day.